Welcome to the Killer Innovation Show, the longest continuously produced podcast in history. Each week, Phil McKinney brings you the insights and strategies to amplify your creativity and innovation skills. Here's your host, Phil McKinney.
Welcome to this week's Killer Innovations. Today's guest is going to just blow your mind. I went into this interview not knowing exactly what to expect. I had gotten pitched having this individual on the show. The publicist did an absolutely amazing job of setting it up. But when we got on the Zoom call and we started the conversation and then we started the show, I could have gone 2 hours easy on this interview. Today's guest is Gregory Shepard. Gregory is a serial entrepreneur. This guy has started 12 startups with 12 liquidities. This guy has 100% batting average. Take Babe Ruth, Hank Aaron, all of the great baseball players, add them all together, and you won't even get to a batting average that this guy has hit. And he's had some major deals. He's received 4 private equity awards for leading transactions between $250 million and $1 billion. He's got 20 years experience. He covers everything from biotech to marketing tech to ad tech to transit technologies. So he's not tied to any given that was part of it. He's had one transaction that one of those 12 topped out at $925 million. He's a Forbes book author. He hosts a podcast over on Forbes. The guy is prolific on articles and publications. He's in Fortune, Entrepreneur, U.S. News and World Reports, and he averages about 1 article a month. Greg is the founder and boss of Capital Partners, which is a global syndicate for investing in early stage technical startups worldwide, with a 100% track record. So that alone should get you to listen. Now, here's the other piece that we spend a fair amount of time talking about. And that is one is he shares the formula. He shares how did he hit 12 out of 12? And he shares the formula with it. So you want to listen just for that formula. But 2, also, and Greg is very open about this, he's autistic. He is what we call neurodivergent. And that was actually the pitch that got my attention. I've talked about it on the show before. I have a nonprofit called Hacking Autism. I started it when I was CTO at HP. And Greg and I got off onto a whole series of conversations even before the show about hiring and how do you hire. And in the show, we talk about the fact is look, Greg has had phenomenal career success, 12 out of 12. 2 of those went to eBay, and he was CTO at eBay for a while. So this formula that he's crafted, how he sees things, how he thinks about things is different. And Greg shares how you, as a team leader, as an employer, as a CEO, as a chief innovation officer, whatever your role is, how you can tap into this opportunity, how you can tap into this untapped market. Those individuals with an autism diagnosis have an 80% unemployment rate. This is a segment of the population that if you figure out how to tap into it, can give you that creative spark, can get you that level of innovation occurring within your organization. So, 1, listen to the whole show. Get the formula that Greg shares with regards to how he did 12 out of 12. 2, listen about neurodivergent hiring and think about how you can put that into your own organization. And if you're interested, you can go over to hackingautism.org. you can drop me a note and I can introduce you to Tara, who runs Hacking Autism for me on a day-to-day basis. She's the CEO. She's really the brains behind the operation. She's the one that is the expert in this field. If you want to start a neurodivergent hiring program, Hacking Autism can help you do that. And you can actually send that email to Tara, Tara, at hackingautism.org. That email goes directly to her, and she will reply. So with that, I'm going to get the heck out of the way. You definitely want to hear this episode. You want to stick through to the end? Yes, I know. It's longer than normal, but get ready to get your socks blown off. Let's jump in to this week's episode. So, Greg, I was looking at your background. You have a long history as an entrepreneur. You've started a whole bunch of companies. But not only that, you've been quite successful at selling those companies to eBay and others. What got you started? What put you on that entrepreneurial path that you've just been so successful at?
I mean, honestly, I struggled a lot in school, so I had a really, really hard time. And I went to I think 10 high schools, and I was in special ed, and then they couldn't figure out what to do with me. I finally got out of high school, and then I needed to start a business in order to survive because I couldn't get a job because I was not, I didn't interview very well. So whenever I talked to people, I wasn't talking very much, and had a hard time taking my thoughts and creating words, and used to stutter a whole bunch and stuff. So I started my first businesses in high school. What I did is I got Rubik's cubes. Do you remember when Rubik's cubes were like a big?
Oh yeah.
So I got a Rubik's cube, and I was solving the Rubik's cube, and then I would started charging people to solve the Rubik's cube, and then they wanted to buy them. So then I started selling Rubik's cubes, and I ended up importing them by the case and selling them. And that was like my first business. And that's when I got the idea, and I was like, oh, I can just like sell things, and that's how I can survive. And then I just, started with smaller businesses and moved my way up. And when software happened, it was like the most amazing thing ever, because it just fit with how I think, and you can take an idea, you can take anything that you can think of, and you can just make it, you can just create it. And for me, that was like it was like the holy grail of life. And I remember thinking, I can just make anything I can come up with, I can just create it. And then I started going into software.
So when you talk about your high school, and we were talking before we started the show, you gave me a little bit of insight on the challenges that you had in high school of trying to even just finish to get out of high school. What was it? What's the? I mean, albeit I think everybody has their own high school experience, but yours is not even just a normal high school experience from the standpoint of interests or whatever. It was also around learning styles and how you learned relative to how the normal. It sounded like, at least to me, it sounded like it was how you learned and your challenges in relation to how the schools operated and how they taught.
Yeah, they teach everybody the same way.
Right.
And I couldn't understand the way they were teaching me. So I started to try to develop my own ways of learning. So I started recording the classes and on a tape, like an old tape recorder, those big tape recorders, and then listening to them. And then I started drawing because with synesthesia, you have sometimes people see colors, and that's common. I see colors, but I also see shapes, and the shapes connect with lines, and then inside of the shapes are information, like capsules of information, and the colors represent emotion. So I started seeing these things, kind of like, it's hard to explain. It's not like it's in the air, but it's kind of like it's in the air in my head. I don't know how to explain it, but So what I started to do was and I thought I was crazy, so I didn't want to tell anybody because I thought they would think I was crazy. So I started to put the information and organize the information into the capsules. And when I started to do that, I was able to like draw a line from one to another. And then the line started to have colors, and then I started to learn finally. And I still use that today, and I started to connect things together, and then I started to learn about, and then I got really interested in like fractal geometry and physics and quantum physics. And I started to use the way that people talk about physics to recognize the world around me. And then that's when I started to learn. But during that time, I got beat up all the time. I got called a lot of things, and it was a struggle. But then, I started to realize that, I could understand the world just differently. And then I could start talking about things differently. And then people started to actually, they were interested, for the first time. It was like they were interested. Wait, what happens? How does that happen? And then the whole world sort of opened up to me. But the struggle was like, 10 high schools. They were years without any school because they were trying to figure out what to do with me because I was being special ed. But then I would take this test, and I would be really scoring super high in one area and then super low in another area. And I started to understand that the delta was the difference between the two, like the processing between, like writing something or getting information in or getting information out. But what was in my head was okay. So it was a real struggle, to figure out how to learn, just to figure out how to learn.
Well, and I want to go back. You were talking about, you had to basically almost reverse engineer how you thought and therefore how you learned in order to take what input was being provided, whether that's a teacher speaking or whatever. And you and I were talking before, and the listeners of this show have heard me talk about at least my perspective on hiring people who think differently, hiring people who look at problems differently. The neurodiverse. They refer to the rest of they refer to me and et cetera as neurotypicals. I kind of think I'm not typical, but but I think there's a huge untapped potential of working with people who do think differently, who do look at problems differently, who have a different approach. In my case, with my three kids, we homeschooled them. So we homeschooled them until their first day of college. That was the first time they ever sat in the classroom. And what I figured out, what my wife and I figured out, and really I have to give my wife the credit, was that we had three kids with three different learning styles. We had an audio learner, we had a visual learner, and we had a tactile learner. My son, who is now 34 years old, works for the Walt Disney Company. He's dysgraphic, but he's tactile. You give him a model of the human body and let him take it apart and let him put it back together again, boom, he's got it. It's locked and loaded, right? But if you sat there and gave him a book to read, it ain't gonna happen, no matter how hard you pound on him, right? So my wife had to create 3 curriculums, could not do. And this is where I think in the educational system today is you realize how hard teachers have got it. You got a classroom of 30 kids. How many different learning styles are in a classroom? Mm-hmm. Right? Now put in, some number of neurodiverse who don't quite fit into those kind of predefined categories. How do you teach? How do you, and then you got teaching styles. Teachers have certain teaching styles. I always think that the school system misses out when they don't match teaching styles to learning styles.
Yeah.
Because if you get the match, I think that's that's that year the kid really loved their teacher and everything was fantastic and oh my God, breakthroughs is when you match teaching styles to learning styles. And I just think that's a gap in the educational system.
like I tell people a lot of times, I say, there is like the screen, or like the fabric. I think of it like a fabric of how normal people or neurotypical people see everything, right? So like looking at a screen door and they see that, and we see what through it to the other side, and what's behind it. And so when you're talking about teaching, they're teaching you, pay attention to the screen door, pay attention to the screen door. And we can't, because the only thing we see is all the movement happening on the other side of the screen door, and so sometimes, for like, especially with dyslexia, I have pretty strong dyslexia, and with dyslexia and dysgraphia, the combination of those things, the screen door is like is the words, right, in a book, for example, right?
Right.
And when I look at a book, I see patterns and shapes. I don't see words. It's hard. I can read the same paragraph over and over and over and over and over, and not even know. I can read several pages and not even know what I read, have no idea, no comprehension of what it is that I read. And I struggle the whole time, and I'm trying to just get through it, just get from one word to another word without rereading the same word over and over again, or looking at a page and just seeing like these patterns, like pictures, like trails of like wherever a paragraph ends or a period is, or any kind of punctuation, I see trails and patterns in those things. And so it's almost impossible to get past it for me. The only way I learned how to do it was cutting a hole in a 3x5 card, and then sliding that down and keeping the sentence inside of the hole the whole time, like a little hole
Oh,
that I
okay.
would read through. And now with computers, it's amazing, because I have, tools that I can just have the computer read to me or record things and stuff like that. But I think that the educational system, I thought it was going to be better because my kids are also diverse, and I thought they went to public school. I wanted them to go to public school, but then they did the same thing they did with me, which is where they come into a classroom and they take these students out in front of all the other kids. They put them in march you down the field to the trailer at the end of the soccer field, and everybody knows what you're going there for. And then you get returned back to your class and then pulled out again. And, the whole distraction and the walk of shame, to the area, and then everybody knowing that you're different and stuff like that, it doesn't help with it. And then in my day, they just put me in a class with a whole bunch of people with a lot of different things, and gave us coloring books and put on movies, and didn't even try to teach us, and so my kids, I gave up basically on the public school district, just because they were trying to cram all of these different diversities into one classroom. It was just a
Yep.
disaster, and so I found this school called Winston School that my kids go to, that specializes in people that are neurodiverse, and so they teach. There's only like 8 kids in a classroom, and they teach each kid in a certain. So
Yep.
it's a really beautiful, it's a beautiful process, to watch them learn. And the main difference is they teach the kids how they learn before they teach them, right? So it starts out with
Oh,
understanding how you learn yourself first, and then after you figure out how you learn yourself, then you can start learning. But until you learn that yourself, it's impossible, because you're constantly getting like punched in the face with, it's just, you can't even wrap your head around it,
well,
so I think that
yeah,
that changed.
I think that point is really important, and I don't know if I've ever heard it described that way. I mean, for instance, my daughter and I run a nonprofit we were talking about before, Hacking Autism, and we partner here in Colorado, because of where we're located, with Temple Grandin. And so Temple's been to our events. I did a fundraiser for Temple, for the Temple Grandin School in Boulder one year, to help raise money for the Temple Grandin School. And over at the Temple Grandin School, they do that's one of the things that they focused on, right, is is tailoring it literally to every kid. And the success rate they have with those kids, it's pretty amazing when you
Yeah.
finally help them understand their learning style and then match the teaching style to the learning style.
Yeah. Or transform it. Like,
Right.
like it, what I do a lot of times is when I'm trying to learn something, I will translate it to the way I learn. Like
Mhm.
I'll see how they're teaching it, but now I've gotten good at it, right? So I can see how they're teaching something, and then I will take what they're teaching and translate it to the way that I learn, and then I actually learn it that way.
Mhm.
So the first part is just translating, is taking what they're doing and then turning it into a way I can learn it. It's a real it's it's kind of exhausting actually, but it
Well,
when you're trying to keep up with people that learn really fast and you have to translate it every time, it's you know.
yeah, but I mean, you've obviously have become very good at it. So how many companies have you started? What's your
Oh,
count up to?
yeah, 12 companies and 12 exits. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you've sold some for hundreds of millions of dollars. You've sold 2 companies to eBay. I mean, you've kind of like crushed it on that. What? Okay, so there's some people out there who haven't gotten one exit, right? I
Yeah.
was lucky. I did 13 startups and I got one exit. You did
Uh,
12, and how many exits did you get? Right?
well,
You got
yeah.
12 startups and 12 exits. That's a batting average that puts you in kind of a Babe Ruth, Willie Mays, you name the sport analogy out there. What's the secret?
There's a little algorithm that I learned that's what I teach at Boss Startup Science now in the school that I was trying to help entrepreneurs, with this specifically people like me, and other people that are sort of marginalized. Um, and there's this algorithm, and the way that it works is there's always a life cycle. And so, I learned that there's the beginning, and then there's this life cycle. And every stage of the life cycle, there's validation before and after, and there's a round in the middle of funding. And then there are certain things that you have to do in a certain sequence along this life cycle. And so, it goes from like, vision, and then it goes into product, and then, the go to market strategy, and so on and so forth. And then what I did is I started to put layers underneath that. But the most important thing, when people ask me this, the most important thing is I do a lot of meditation because it helps me keep keep together, you know. So I was meditating. I was at the beach and I was meditating, and I went into really deep, and and then it turned dark. And I came out, woke up, and it's just dark except for the one star, which was the North Star. And I started to have this pattern of thoughts that when you start a business, it's like a GPS, and with the GPS you have to know where you are and you have to know where you're going. And once you have those two coordinates, then in between is like turn by turn directions, and sometimes you have detours, but you need to know where you're going and where you are, because it tells you how long it's going to take, it tells you how much fuel you're going to use, it tells you everything that you need to know. So what I did is I created this connection of those two systems to the acquirer of the business. And what I've learned is that the acquirer of a business always, just like customers, buy something either to save or make money. That just two things. It's very simple. And so when the acquirer, most of the time they're doing it to make money. And the reason why they're doing that is because for them, it's a long game, and their lifetime value is what's fundamental to them. And the customer acquisition cost, the cost to get a customer, is a one-time sink cost. If they grow the lifetime value, then that's how they become profitable. So that made me think, I have to understand, if I'm going to sell to them, I have to understand who their customers are. I have to understand, because they're buying my customers, because essentially they want their customers to buy my product, and that's the only reason why they're going to buy the company. So I started going through this process, and I started coming up with, there is, if your whole business is just a product to your acquirer, right, then why wouldn't you plan for the exit when you start, just like you plan to have a customer when you start a business that's solving a problem? So not having somebody that's going to acquire your business is the same as starting a business without having a customer. And so putting those two things together, and then you work towards that end, and not just one acquire, typically I'd say 3 to 5, but you understand them really deeply, and you can start to see patterns in the kind of companies they acquire, what kind of multiples are they paying, top or bottom line, or what valuation drivers, growth margin, retention are they after? And then you can design your business to flow into their business. And so then the next step is that you start doing partnerships with them, and then once you start doing partnerships with them, you reduce the risk of, can the software integrate? Can the culture get along with the other culture? Will the customers buy their customers buy your product? And you can solve those risks. And it's sort of like a lobster trap. I call it a lobster trap because the acquirer doesn't even know that you're driving down this path. And then you get it to the point where you need a round of funding, and then naturally you go to them for the round of funding. And then you put in a clause to acquire the company in the funding. And then you start going down that thread, right? So an example is, we had this company called Delarock that we invested in, and they had built this software to help transportation companies evolve in terms of people that were riding the bus could pay with their iPhone, or they could have a card in their pocket with a chip and they walk by, and now the bus drivers don't have to get distracted. The customers can just reload their card on the internet or use their iPhone or whatever to get through, and then there's all this data that comes in. And what we did is we created the software, landed the first customer. The customer was the same customer that the eventual acquirer, which was Cubic Transportation, wanted. So we got the customer, started showing them how their customer would work with this solution, and then started doing more and more, and then started collaborating with them and doing deals together with them. Then a round of funding came, and we asked them, okay, well, we need some funding. Do you want to fund? And they were like, yeah, we'll put some money in. And then we put in a clause that said, look, you can acquire the company for a preset multiple on, top or bottom, whatever they chose, in the next 12 months. But if you don't, then your money is essentially a loan, and we move forward with the deal. Otherwise, the money that you invest in the company is a down payment, And the company sold for, $50 million, close to $50 million, 3 years from the day I got started. And it only had it was like a 40x multiple on top line revenue.
40x.
Yeah, it was 40x. Yeah, they had like 2-something million revenue, sold for almost 50 million. So, it was that pattern is the same pattern every time, all the time. When I look around, there are variations to that pattern, but that pattern is a consistent, persistent thing that you can see. But like I said, you have to know where you're going before you start.
Right.
And a lot of people don't think about that. You don't go on vacation without knowing where you're going and planning fuel and food and how, all the things that go along with it. Right.
Yep.
And a lot of people just with businesses, they just kind of step out the door and start running, and they don't understand, if they're going the wrong way or not. So when I made this mistake with one of the companies I built, where I built it up and I had all these customers and I had an acquirer lined up, and I was talking to the acquirer, and then they told me, they said, well, half of your customers we don't even care about. They're not the kind of customers we want. And they were willing to pay me for the half that they did want. And I didn't take it because I was like, this is, so I went back, and over the course of 3 years, I got rid of all those customers and I replaced them with good customers, and then sold the business for a hell of a lot more than I would have gotten had I, tried to do it then. And that was the lesson that really locked this sort of, little algorithm, in my head, that this is a pattern that is natural. It's the way that, it's just natural, it's organic. Does that make sense?
It does. So the question is did all of your exits have the similar kind of a structure where you understand the acquirer early in the process, and then partner with them, and then open up a round with them, and then have the buyout option so is that all the same formula on all 12-year deals?
Yeah, except for the first couple. They were they were a little different because I
Right.
was still learning about this.
Right.
I was still put it together and refine it. But it's not just my deals, but if you look around and you start tracking it, and you can just reverse engineer, and you can see this pattern emerge everywhere.
Right.
It's just constantly. So if you're somebody like Salesforce and you look at all their acquisitions, they're selling more software to the same profile customer, the same ICP and persona, ideal customer profile and persona. And they're all, and Adobe does the same thing, and Google does the same thing, and they all do the exact same thing, right? So they have figured out that if they pay, $100 for a customer and they sell them $100 worth of software, their CAC to LTV ratio is just even, right? But that's only for the customer. That's just the cost to acquire the customer. But now if they sell another piece of software and another piece of software, but the customer acquisition cost is still always $100
Right.
or whatever it is, then they start to make gains. So the arbitrage is between the lifetime value and the customer acquisition cost.
Right.
But if you don't plan, like, from the very beginning to line your customer up with theirs, then you're not valuable to them because you haven't proved and de-risked the acquisition.
Right, because a lot of startups that want to do the sale, their argument is their acquirer, oh, that's your customer, but what you really want is you want this new customer. And acquirers aren't interested in that. They're not interested in plowing a new field. They want to maximize the return on the field they've already plowed.
Yeah, it's a lot safer, right?
Right.
Like, if you look at these big companies that branch way outside of their wheelhouse, and they don't usually make it, right? But if they stay in their wheelhouse, even if they want to branch out of their wheelhouse, they do it slowly over time. They don't just do it, right? They slowly over time, grow. But it's like we were talking about before the show, is that, the universe sort of supplies a path, and you just have to pay attention to the path.
Right.
But the broad direction of the path is led by the North Star. And the thing is about that is that, in that concept of building your North Star, which is, what do you sell, and who do you sell it to, and how much do you sell it, and when do you sell it, and why should they buy it, and all this kind of stuff. Same thing as you would do with your product, you do with your company in whole. And what you learn is that if you stay on the rails, you get the fastest route from one place to another. But if you stay off the rails, if you don't have that guiding light, the exit strategy at the end of the day, it's like crossing the ocean. If you're 1 degree off, you're on a different continent.
Right.
But as long as you're staying, constantly making adjustments, right, to where you're going, then you have a direction. If the direction is wrong, you can re-aim. But now your company and your overall way of thinking is structured in such a way that you are one united force going towards some destination. And even if the destination is wrong, it's easy to rally the troops and aim it at a different destination. But if you don't do that, then everything is sort of like, a yard sale. It's just like everybody is kind of, they get flustered. You can make a pivot quickly and easily if you already have your company and your team and the way that you think and everything is structured towards, this is where we're going. This is where we're going constantly, and, oh, we're off here. And so I use a series of like leading indicators, lagging indicators, and valuation drivers. So leading indicators being the thing that drives the financials, because most times, people, they use their financials to lead the business. You go to board meetings all the time, it's always like financial. But that's like driving down the freeway looking at the rear view mirror, because those numbers started a year ago.
Yep.
So everybody's a year behind all the time. So those are the outcome of something that happened earlier. So I focus on the leading indicators, like what I'm doing now to change the lagging indicators that ultimately change the financial numbers, right? And then what I did is I started aligning the functional areas in a company to those valuation drivers. Like, so if growth margin and retention are always going to be like, that's everything, right? It's always growth margin, retention. So then you think growth, well, that's sales and marketing, and retention, well, that's, customer experience, and margin, well, that's operations, right? And so now you line them up, and then you start to stack rank the other drivers underneath them, right? So if it's growth, for example, and it's marketing, which is at the beginning, you're like, how many traffic, how many leads come in, and so on and so forth. That's the most that's the leading indicator for them. But strategically, the content that you create, the narrative and all that is the most leading indicator. So all these things sort of waterfall one, from one into the other one, and they all kind of line up in a. It's really clear. It's not, it's, to me, it's like so. It's like math, you know, just this equals that plus this times that, divided by this, and everything works that way. And then now you can steer the company, right? So if you understand that you can control the company, you can steer it in like a steering wheel where you want it to go, and you have your GPS of where you are and where you're going, and you have a whole team that's aligned to that. It's hard to take down a company like that. You may have some fumbles, but you're not going to fail. You're just going to, you can recover. You know what I mean? Like you
Right.
get used to
Yep.
rest recoveries,
Yep.
and you can succeed almost every time. Almost every time.
Well, I don't know. You got a pretty darn high batting average compared to anybody else I've talked to. So, I mean,
Thank you.
12 for 12 is like crushing it here. So, I'm going to guess that there's a bunch of listeners of this show going, okay, so how do I hire someone like Greg? How do I find people that think like Greg who kind of can unravel these kinds of complexities? And we were talking before around you had to go create your own path, your own set of jobs, becoming an entrepreneur, because as you said, you didn't interview well. Well, you're interviewing just fine on the show, by the way.
Yeah.
So, but you talked before we got started about things that you've had to adjust and learn as you went through. But the way you look at the situation is different. You discern the pattern and reverse the pattern to apply it, and you've applied it 12 times, and you've done a heck of a job at applying that. How many other people out there like you, or are you really truly a one-off?
No, we're all over. We're all neurodivergent, and we all see the world differently, and it's not, a matter. I don't think it's a matter of intelligence. I just think it's a matter of the lens that you're looking through. And most people, they kind of are looking, because they learn the same way. I think that they see the world the same way. And so when they're solving problems or doing things like trying to understand ecosystems or something like that, right? They're all looking through the same way they learn, which is this common thing, But when you're neurodivergent, you don't have, I don't know, groupthink, I guess, is that, you
Right.
don't have that kind of thing, right? Because
Yep.
you're all by yourself. And so you have no choice but to try to like look in between and around and over and under and through to try to figure things out. And when you do that, you see everything different than most other people do. And so the people that are neurodivergent, we naturally do this. It's not like work either. It just is. It just happens. I do it all the time, all the time, constantly. I'm doing it when we're in traffic, and I'm like analyzing the flow of the cars, and it's just something we do. It's not something we even try to do. It just happens. And I think that the people need to cherish these neurodivergent people instead of like brooming them off and saying, okay, well, this is just like a outlier, like these ones are outliers, just put them over here. I think that if they really put the time into really study the divergent people, that they would see some real magic, like Elon Musk and Richard Branson and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And these guys all are divergent at some way, and they have done things that people that aren't divergent haven't been able to do, just because they see the world differently. And it also is like, sometimes I take on these big huge things, and I don't have the same level of fear, because my fear is covered up with like logic. Like, this is how it needs. I think like sometimes, like, this is how it's supposed to be, like this. They're doing it wrong. This is how it should be. And it makes you so frustrated that it's not that way, that you don't see the fear as much because you're just so focused on like this is wrong and it needs to be different, and you're just so focused on it, that you don't even the fear and the doubt and all that stuff doesn't even hit because it's all covered up with like, I got to fix this, I got to fix this, I have to fix this, and it just gets in your head and you just have to do it.
Well, I got it exactly. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you're neurodivergent, you've been quite successful. What can organizations, or what should organizations do? What should leaders do to attract, support, take advantage of neurodivergent hiring? Because today, as you were talking about, brooming them off, right? Most organizations, neurodivergent can't even make it through the application process to even think about getting hired. You and I were talking before the show started about the fact that if you have a autism diagnosis in the United States, you have an 80% unemployment rate. There's a huge, now that's across the entire spectrum, so let's be fair, right? But in my work with our nonprofit Hacking Autism, talking to people that are neurodivergent, it is the frustration of just even getting a foot in the door, to even getting an organization to even say, something, we actually want to recruit people who are neurodivergent. So what can leaders do to make themselves attractive, or what do they need to do differently to support neurodivergent employee base?
Get rid of the obstacles. So like, I remember so clearly, when you're trying to get a job, it's like, okay, you have to fill out an application. And we always overanalyze everything, right? So there is no small question. There is no small thing. Everything is big. Everything is explored to the to the roots. So sometimes even just an application that asks you a question and you're immediately thinking that's the wrong question because the answer is unattainable, because there's more information than the possible, amount of room they give you, or the question itself, and you just get shut down. You can't make it past that because you're spinning,
Right.
and you're just like, they're doing this wrong, this is the wrong, and that same thing that makes us exceptional is the same thing that stands in the way. So what they're doing the same thing that they do in school, that they're saying this is the application process for the 95% or whatever, right? And that application process is the same. It's just like saying this is the education for the 95%. It's not, it doesn't work for us, right? So and you just don't do it because you can't. I don't know how to explain it, but sometimes sometimes you see these forms or you see these things and you're just looking at it and you just can't do it. You just spin or whatever, and then you get in your head, and then your autism start to come, and it's a mess, right? So I think the best way to do it is to start talking to somebody about something they're passionate about. Like you're talking to me about this stuff and I'm passionate about it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you talk to me about something else, you would know, you would see the autism more, right? Because this stuff I rehearsed in my head, and I'm talking about things I know. But so if you're asking somebody to fill out an application, you're starting out by talking about something they're not good at. So why would you interview somebody in the areas where they are weak, instead of interviewing in the areas that they're strong? So if you change the format to have a conversation with them and just ask them what they're passionate about and tell them, you will see that the capabilities of these people, like, so sometimes it's a gaming person, or sometimes it has to do with mechanical engineering, and it's just something they do, and you can see, wow, this person really understands the depth of this and they have their own viewpoints on it. But then if you're asking them, oh, can you fill out this application to go, work at a store or something, they're bored.
Yep.
And it's not enough,
Yep.
and so they just, it doesn't, and then you live this horrible life of like second rate, you're not taking advantage of what you have. I think that the process itself, I mean, sometimes it frustrates me because in the world, you have handicap parking, and you have blind people that have special walkways, and you have all of these things for everybody. Yet the neurodiverse have nothing. There's nothing for us, nothing at all. Nobody even knows what it is. And when you're trying to go through an application process to get a job, or even just like at the DMV, or whatever. And I just tell people, because used to be I was really embarrassed, but now I think people know better and they don't make fun of you anymore and stuff. So now I'll just say to somebody, I have autism. Please be patient, and I have a letter in my car. So if I get pulled over by a police officer, I give them a letter, that doesn't happen in the job market. There's nothing like that, right? So you don't have any way to see the capabilities of somebody when you're limiting the ways that they could show it to you.
Well, and in our own case, because we have where I'm a CEO, we have a neurodivergent hiring program. We've had some successes. The hard, well, I should say the hard part is someone feeling comfortable to self-declare. We're not going to announce that someone's on the spectrum. If they feel comfortable talking about it, that's fine. What we will do, what we have found to be successful, though, is to actually provide coaching, not to the neurodivergent, but to their manager and to their team. So they know, because it takes a different management style, because you talked about reading a form. A lot of large corporations, HP was one of these, where you had the automated online if you wanted to apply. And that has like a 99.9% stoppage rate for neurodivergent. They can't get past just answering the questions on the online, which makes it more efficient for the internal process, but you're missing out on a whole bunch of candidates. But also the literal nature of it. How do you communicate with someone that's neurodivergent, right? When they take everything literally and don't pick up on some of the subtleties. And what we've found is helping managers understand that, one, makes them more open to the neurodivergent, but here's the side benefit. It actually helps them with their neurotypical employees.
Oh, huh.
Because of the clarity of communication. We tend to try to talk in all these subtleties. We tend to want to, the hints like, you may not want to do that, those kind, we try to be soft, right?
Yeah.
And everybody is trying to figure out, okay, I'm trying to read between the lines, and some of your employees are better at reading between the lines. With neurodivergent, you can't do the subtlety between the lines. You got to be clear.
Yeah, sure.
You got to be specific. And what we have found is then when managers do that, not just for their neurodivergent staff, but for their entire staff, the other staff's like, great, I don't have to go through the mental Olympics of trying to figure out what that hint was. What were they hinting at me that I should be doing or not be doing? So it was kind of an unexpected surprise, I guess, from of recognizing clarity of communication, directness of communication has a broader benefit. It's not something, and I absolutely hate the word. I get, anytime I hear this, like at an event or whatever, and people talk about accommodation. It's not an accommodation, right?
Yeah.
It is recognizing that we all are different, and thinking styles is just as important in any organization as any other form of diversity. And so how do you accommodate, do you think it's an accommodation to, for gender? That's demeaning in my book. So that's just one of my hot button issues.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think I don't like that. I don't like special needs. I don't like all those things.
Right.
Just divergent. That's good enough. Different. Divergent means different, so we're neurodivergent, different thinking, and I think that, like, whenever, one of the things I think that I've been told as a CEO when I'm running businesses and stuff is that people like the fact that everything is so, like, this is it. There is no, like, hazy stuff, right? It is super clear. And when somebody gives me something that's unclear, I drill in until I get a real answer. And some people don't like it, but most people are like refreshed by it
Yep.
because there is no like dancing around something. It is like I'm trying to get an answer.
Yep.
I can't do an if then scenario, um, little mechanism without having a real answer, because then my original data point could be flawed with a hazy answer. Um, so I think that that's a really important thing, is that when you're working with somebody that's divergent, the middle that everybody seems to like to stay all the time is a non-starter for us. It's like a treadmill. We're waiting for the real answer.
Yep.
So it makes me, even in personal situations, when somebody's, do you want to eat? Well, and you're like, I just need a yes or a no. you know just I need a yes or a no. I can't have anything in the middle, because how do you act on something if it's in the middle? You can't. You're trying to get to one side or the other side of the equation. So
Yep.
it's really frustrating. So a lot of times, I think in an interview process too, they're asking you these emotionally, they're like I think of them as emotional questions. They're not data questions. They're not like real answers. They're sort of like conversation interviews, and you know, we don't really want to have conversations unless the conversation is driving at answers and solutions and real worthwhile stuff. Like I don't watch movies for entertainment. I watch documentaries because I think it's a waste of time to watch a, some stupid movie when I'm not going to learn anything. Um, you know and that's like, I've talked to other people that are diverse, and everybody's like, yeah, that's why do people do that? I don't understand. You go to a movie, pay all this money, and you learn nothing for 2 hours of your life. It's like, why? Well, I could learn about physics, or I could learn about the environment, or I could learn about politics, I mean mathematics, and there's so much to learn. Why would I waste my time? And that's how a lot of interviews go. It's just we think of it as a waste of time, because there's no real, it's not targeted. It's like, and I think a lot of times too that they're hiring because they want, you hear this a lot, culture fit. Like, are you a culture fit? you know and you're like, no, I'm not a culture fit, and I never will be, and I never have been a culture fit, but I'll give you what you're after. you know
Yep.
and I'm not going to weird anybody out as long as they could see past my ticks and stuff. you know um, and that's the other thing too. Sometimes you're in an interview, and like I have to put my hands, I do a lot of fiddling with my hands, like I am right now under the table, and I have to like keep, like, hold them together, and sometimes it just comes out. Sometimes it'll come out somewhere else. It's like it just wants to come out. And then people are always really distracted by that in the interview too. They're like, like, why is whatever it is that's happening, because they change all the time, why is that happening, and
Right.
then you're self-conscious, and the whole thing comes off the rails. you know I think that for what I do now is I just say, I found a lot of relief in just saying I have autism, and just, instead of trying to hide it and pretending like they don't notice, or trying to cover it up somehow, or pretend like I can be like a normal person. Instead, I just say it, and then I'm proud of it, and I don't care. And surprising how many people are like, oh, okay, and they're cool, and they're cool about it. And sometimes they say, I couldn't tell, and that always makes me crazy, because I'm like, it's not like I'm wearing an eye patch. It doesn't. It's all on the inside. It's not like you I'm missing an arm, and you can tell. So it's an interesting question about, like, how do you hire? How do you um, you know f- how do you work through this? But I think the easy answer is logic. When I was younger, and I was in special ed, they called it, classes. They have this square, and inside the square is a circle. and the square is logic and the circle is emotion. And they would just tell you, okay, you got to keep your circle in the square all the time. You can't let the emotion go outside of the square. And I was always like thinking about this. And then I realized that in the real world, like out with, neurotypical people, the circle's always outside the square. We're trying to keep it in the square, but everybody else, it's always outside the square, and then you're like really confused, like, why am I the one that has to keep the circle in the square when they always have the circle outside the square? You know what I mean? It's like, does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. I've never heard it described that way. Hey, Greg, as we wrap up today's show, we've gone long, but this has been a great conversation. We'll have to have you back on, and maybe we'll spend a little more time talking specifically on the hacking autism. But if people want to track what you're doing and what you're up to, what is the best way to do that? Where can they follow you and see what you're working on?
Yeah, LinkedIn is good. My website, my personal website is GregoryShepard.com. So there's a book next year that comes through there. That's where it is. But the LinkedIn, I update LinkedIn every day, multiple times a day with lots of different things.
Yep.
And it's a big thing that I do is overcoming challenges. So every year since I was 18, first one was to graduate from high school, but I've climbed the rock face of El Capitan and ran a marathon and rode a bicycle 525 miles. Now I'm going to swim across Lake Tahoe. And I've never done any of these things before. And so it's all about overcoming obstacles. And the idea is that once I figured that I could do it, I wanted to keep doing it to prove to myself that I can keep doing it. And those things are in the website and everything as well.
Great. And also, I would encourage you to go over and check out Greg's TEDx talk. And he also is the host of the podcast over on Forbes. So we'll have links for all of this in the show notes. So you want to go over there and grab those and see what Greg's up to and follow him. And Greg, thanks for taking the time for joining us on today's show.
Thank you.
Great. So what did you think? I bet you were blown away. I don't think I oversold it. This conversation with Greg was just, mind-blowing. After we ended the show, because we were already going on 45, 50 minutes, so I wrapped up the show. Greg and I stayed on for another 20, 25 minutes, continuing the conversation. Don't worry, I am going to have Greg back on the show. We'll spend more time talking about all of his exits and the strategies he used to exit those, but also Greg is very passionate about the community of neurodivergent individuals and the value they can bring to organizations such as yours. So stay tuned. Greg will be back on a future episode of Killer Innovations. So as we wrap up this week's show, thank you for hanging in there. I know this went longer than typical, but I think it was worth it, and I just did not want the conversation to end. So, again, thank you for your time, because I know your time is incredibly valuable, and I greatly appreciate that. All the information that Greg shared will be links in the show notes, so you can hop over there to connect with him or follow him over on LinkedIn. And like I said, he's got a book coming out here soon with Forbes Books. And also with all the work that he's doing with the Boss Capital Partners. So you'll want to check all that out. So with that, thank you for your time. Help us spread the word. If you've got somebody, particularly your HR department, and you want to encourage them to do a neurodivergent hiring program, send them this episode. If you have someone in your family who is neurodivergent, encourage them. Send them this episode so they can hear about Greg and his work, and we can introduce them to the work at Hacking Autism. So with that, thanks again. Greatly appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Podcasting nonstop since 2005, this has been the Killer Innovation Show on the Innovators Network.